There is a dangerous secret in the world of healing, a truth so uncomfortable that most spiritual guides and therapists avoid it with an almost religious zeal. The secret is this: many who set out to heal others are, in fact, the sickest people. They do not operate from an integrated wound, but from an open and infected one, projecting their own shadow, their own unresolved pain, onto those who seek help. This is the archetype of the shadow healer, the hidden and tragic face of the wounded healer. He hides in plain sight. He is the guru who needs disciples to validate his existence. He is the therapist who feels powerful listening to the problems of others because it distracts him from his own internal chaos. He is the savior friend who feeds on your crisis because his own life is a desert of purpose. They use the language of light to manipulate in the shadows, offering a map to a treasure they themselves have never found. And the scariest part, most of the time, they don't even know they're doing it. They are unconscious prisoners of their own pain. The question, therefore, is not whether you have a wound. We all do. The question that will define the course of your life is your wound turning you into a lighthouse or a black hole? Are you learning to transmute your lead into gold, or are you, unknowingly, poisoning the wells of others with your unexamined suffering? The line between the two is thinner than one might imagine, and crossing it unconsciously is the greatest danger of the soul's journey. If this truth resonates in an uncomfortable place within you, if you feel the call to take the most difficult and rewarding journey of all the descent into your own unconscious to confront what is there, then you are in the right place. This is not a journey for spectators. Subscribe to this channel, not as a follower, but as a fellow traveler who has the courage to look into their own abyss. Activate the notification bell, because each video is a step on a map we are unveiling together. And missing a single piece could leave you lost in the forest. Leave your like as a seal, a silent pact with your own depth, a sign that you are ready to begin the work. And in the comments, write the word journey. This is not a comment for the algorithm. It is a declaration to yourself. It is your first act of courage, the first step out of the shadow of denial. Now, if you are ready, the real exploration begins. In the silent theater of the soul, each of us carries a secret script, written not with ink, but with the scars of our deepest experiences. Modern society, in its frantic pursuit of an aseptic happiness and an inorganic perfection, has taught us to be ashamed of this script. We have been conditioned to see our wounds not as part of our story, but as typos to be erased, as flaws in the system that must be corrected and hidden. We live under the tyranny of positive thinking, an ideology that forces us to build gleaming facades over cracked foundations, resulting in a psychologically fragile and inauthentic existence. But the psyche, in its ancient wisdom, is not fooled by these facades. It knows that true strength, lasting integrity, is born not from the absence of fractures, but from the art of integrating them. It is here that we are introduced to one of the most powerful and paradoxical patterns of human experience, the archetype of the wounded healer. This is not a new concept. It is an ancient truth, personified in the Greek myth of Chiron, the wise centaur, master, and healer who, ironically, suffered from an incurable wound. His greatest pain was simultaneously the source of his greatest wisdom and empathy. He could heal others precisely because he knew the anatomy of suffering in his own flesh. The call to this archetype is rarely a gentle invitation. Most often, it manifests as a profound sense of otherness, a feeling of not belonging, as if you are watching the world through a subtle pane of glass. It is the experience of feeling chronically out of place, a heightened sensitivity that makes the superficiality of the world almost unbearable. This pain of alienation is not a sign that there is something wrong with you. It is the first symptom that your soul is being prepared for a deeper work. It is the inner abyss calling, inviting you on a journey that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. This call forces you to look within, not as an act of narcissism, but of survival. You begin to devour books on psychology, spirituality, and philosophy, not out of academic interest, but because you are desperately searching for a map to your own inner labyrinth. The journey of the wounded healer begins with this solitary quest, this attempt to diagnose one's own soul. It is a path forged in darkness, far from applause and external validation. It is the recognition that your fracture is not a curse to be lamented, but an enigma to be deciphered. And the first clue to deciphering it is to understand that your most personal and untransferable pain is, in fact, an echo of a universal wound, a portal through which you can access and understand the human condition on a level that happiness could never reveal. Embracing this archetype is the first step out of the role of a passive victim and into the posture of a conscious alchemist, ready to transform the poison of your past into the medicine for your future and, ultimately, for the world. It is the decision to stop running from your story and to start reading it as the sacred text it truly is. The transformation of pain into power is the great secret of psychological alchemy, a process that transcends mere overcoming and enters the realm of transmutation. Alchemy does not seek to destroy the raw material, the lead, the pain, but to elevate it to a higher octave of existence, the gold, the wisdom. This process is traditionally divided into three main stages, which serve as a map for the inner journey of the wounded healer. The first and most difficult stage is the nigredo, or the blackening. This is the moment of dissolution, the descent into primordial chaos. It is when you finally stop running and allow the darkness of your wound to swallow you whole. It is the dark night of the soul, a period of depression, confusion, and despair, where all your egoic defenses and certainties about yourself and the world disintegrate. Society teaches us to fear and medicate the nigredo, to flee from it at all costs. But the alchemist of the soul knows that this is the most crucial step. It is in the absolute blackness, in the confrontation with one's own shadow and the putrefied matter of our traumas, that the process of purification begins. One must cook in one's own hell, with no guarantee of return, so that the psychic matter can be broken down into its essential components, ready to be reorganized. After the long and arduous night of the nigredo, emerges the albedo, the whitening. This is the stage of purification and illumination. From the ashes of dissolution, a new consciousness begins to be born. It is the moment when, after having confronted the shadow, you begin to see things with a clarity that was not possible before. Projections are withdrawn, and you start to distinguish what is yours from what belongs to another. It is a phase of washing, where tears are no longer of despair, but of liberation. You begin to perceive the patterns, to understand the roots of your suffering, no longer from a place of victimhood, but of conscious observation. The albedo is the dawn after the dark night, a state of newfound peace and clarity. However, the process is not complete. Clarity without the passion of life is sterile. A final stage is needed to reintegrate this new consciousness into the world. The final stage is the rubedo, the reddening. This is the moment of reunification, of vitalization. The alchemical gold is finally forged. It is when the purified consciousness of the albedo unites with the blood and passion of life. You are no longer separated from the world by your pain or your spiritual clarity. You are fully embodied. Your wisdom is no longer an abstract theory, but a living force that animates your actions, your words, and your purpose. It is in the rubedo that the wounded healer emerges in their fullness. The wound, now transmuted, becomes the philosopher's stone, the substance that not only enriches your own life, but has the power to catalyze transformation in others. Your presence, your words, and your work now carry the weight of the authority of one who has made the complete journey. The power that arises from this is not the power to control or dominate, but the magnetic power of authenticity. It is the strength that emanates from someone who no longer fears their own darkness and therefore does not fear the darkness in others, becoming a safe harbor for souls still navigating the storm of the nigredo. The archetype of the wounded healer is not an identity one chooses, but a destiny that reveals itself. It echoes through patterns of behavior, feelings, and life experiences that, when seen in isolation, may seem like flaws or misfortunes, but when observed together, form a clear mosaic of a soul's calling. Recognizing these signs is the first step to consciously claiming this identity and its inherent power. The first and most universal sign is the aforementioned chronic feeling of otherness. Since childhood, you may have felt like an observer, someone who understands the rules of the social game but cannot or does not wish to fully participate in it. This heightened sensitivity makes you an emotional lightning rod for the unexpressed tensions in your family and environment, causing you to absorb and process emotions that are not your own. Another clear sign is the pattern of attracting people in crisis. Friends, partners, and even strangers seem to instinctively sense that you are a safe space to unload their deepest pains. They pour their stories onto you, and although you may feel drained, there is a part of you that feels at home in this role. This happens because your unhealed wound emits a frequency that resonates with the wound of others, creating a magnetic field of shared suffering. The danger here is becoming an emotional dumping ground if your own boundaries are not strong. A third sign lies in your personal biography. Often, the wounded healer carries a history of early trauma, be it abuse, neglect, loss, or simply the burden of growing up. In an emotionally immature environment, this primary wound becomes the central theme around which your life orbits, consciously or unconsciously. It is the lens through which you see the world, and it is the engine of your search for answers, leading you to a deep fascination with healing systems such as psychology, astrology, mythology, and spiritual practices. You do not study these subjects out of casual curiosity. You study them like a patient seeking a cure for their own illness. The paradox of Chiron manifests glaringly in the sign of being able to offer brilliant advice and insights to others, while feeling completely paralyzed and unable to apply the same wisdom to your own life. You can clearly see the path for others, but your own path seems shrouded in fog. This is because the wound acts like a telescope, allowing you to see pain at a distance in others with great precision. But when you try to point it at yourself, the proximity blinds you. Finally, a subtle but powerful sign is a complex relationship with your own body. Often, the psychic wound manifests physically through chronic illnesses, unexplained pains, or a sense of disconnection and estrangement from your own physical body. It is the soul expressing through the flesh what the mind refuses to acknowledge. Recognizing these echoes of Chiron in your life is not an invitation to victimhood, but a call to responsibility. It is the universe showing you your soul's resume, the credentials that qualify you for the work of transmuting suffering into wisdom. We now enter the most treacherous territory of the journey, the domain of the shadow, where the intention to heal can become a weapon of destruction. The shadow healer is the antithesis of the integrated wounded healer. He is what happens when the ego hijacks the wound and uses it for its own narcissistic ends. This dark archetype is not necessarily a bad person in their conscious intention, but their actions are toxic because they emanate from a deep denial of their own pain. He operates from projection, the psychological defense mechanism where we attribute to others the qualities, feelings, and flaws that we cannot accept in ourselves. The unintegrated wound becomes a distorted lens through which he sees the world, and he spends his life trying to fix in others what is broken within himself. The shadow healer manifests in several personas. The first is the guru. This individual accumulates spiritual or therapeutic knowledge not to liberate themselves, but to create a hierarchy. Where they are at the top, they need followers and disciples to mirror their supposed wisdom, and to fill their inner void, they foster dependency, offering ready-made answers instead of empowering others to find their own. Their greatest threat is the autonomy of their followers, as this would force them to confront their own lack of an inner center. The second persona is the martyr. This healer operates from a place of performative self-sacrifice. They are always overwhelmed, always drained, always giving their all for others. Their suffering becomes their identity and their currency. For obtaining love, attention, and control, they heal from a place of victimhood, creating a dynamic where others feel perpetually indebted and guilty. The subliminal message is, "Look how much I suffer for you, therefore, you cannot abandon me." The third face is the intellectual. This type hides behind a wall of theories, diagnoses, and complex jargon. They are brilliant at analyzing the psyche of others, dissecting their traumas, and offering rational explanations for their suffering. However, they use this intellect as a shield to avoid contact with their own emotions and the visceral pain of their wound. They can talk about the shadow for hours, but refuse to enter their own basement. For them, healing is a mental exercise, not an embodied experience, which makes it sterile and ineffective. Finally, we have the pure projector. This is the most common and subtle form. It is the friend, parent, or partner who is always pointing out the flaws, traumas, and issues of others. They have an incredible talent for seeing the speck in another's eye. as it distracts them from the log in their own. They offer unsolicited advice and criticism disguised as help, all to maintain the illusion of their own superiority and sanity. The confrontation with the shadow healer is a double challenge, recognizing them and the people around us to protect ourselves from their toxic influence, and, most importantly, recognizing their potential within ourselves. The only vaccine against becoming a shadow healer is radical humility, the continuous willingness to be the patient, and the courage to apply to oneself the bitter medicine we so often offer to others. The integration of the wound is not a one-time event, but a continuous process, a daily practice of turning inward with courage and compassion. It is not about fixing yourself, but about becoming a skilled archaeologist of your own soul. This work can be structured into practical steps, metaphors for a journey that is, in essence, deeply personal and non-linear. The first step is mapping the wound. This involves mapping the terrain of your suffering without judgment. Take a journal and begin to describe your primary wound. When did it first appear? What people are associated with it? What situations trigger it today? What emotions does it evoke? Anger, sadness, shame, fear? What limiting beliefs about yourself and the world has it generated? I am not good enough. No one is trustworthy. This is an act of neutral observation. You are not trying to change anything yet, just drawing the map of your inner territory. Be as honest and detailed as possible. This act of naming and witnessing the pain is, in itself, profoundly healing, as it brings the wound out of the dark basement of the unconscious and into the light of awareness. The second step is the archaeological excavation. Once the map is drawn, we begin to dig to understand the deeper layers. This often involves looking at your family and ancestral history. What patterns of suffering are repeated in your lineage? Is the wound of abandonment you feel only yours, or does it echo the experience of your mother, your grandmother? Jung would call this exploring the complexes, clusters of psychic energy around an archetypal theme. The excavation helps us understand that our pain is rarely just ours. We are often carriers of unresolved traumas from past generations. Understanding this depersonalizes the suffering and alleviates the burden of guilt and shame, transforming a personal flaw into an inheritance to be worked with and transformed. The third step is the dialogue with the shadow, a technique inspired by Jung's active imagination. Personify your wound. Give it a name, a form, a voice. In your journal or in meditation, invite this part of you into a dialogue. Ask it, what do you want from me? What are you afraid of? What do you need to feel safe and integrated? At first, the answers may be hostile or childish, as this is a neglected part of you. But with persistence and compassion, the relationship changes. The shadow, when heard, ceases to be a saboteur and becomes an ally, revealing the unmet needs and truths that your conscious ego refused to see. The fourth step is ritualization and honor. Instead of seeing the scar as something to be hidden, create a ritual to honor it. This can be something simple, like lighting a candle on the anniversary of a traumatic event, not to mourn, but to honor your survival and the wisdom born from it. It could be writing a letter of forgiveness to yourself or others without the need to send it. It could be creating a piece of art, a song, or a dance that expresses the story of your wound. Ritualization anchors the psychological work in the physical and symbolic world, communicating to your unconscious that the wound is no longer a source of shame, but a sacred place of power and resilience. This map is not a guarantee of a painless journey, but it offers a structure for navigating the darkness with purpose, transforming the labyrinth of suffering into a path of initiation. Empathy is the sole signature of the wounded healer. It is not the distant sympathy of one who feels pity, nor the cognitive empathy of one who intellectually understands another's state. It is radical empathy, an almost psychic ability to viscerally feel another person's emotional landscape, to resonate with their pain on a cellular level. This is, without a doubt, your greatest superpower, the tool that allows you to create deep connections and catalyze healing in others. When you sit with someone who is suffering, your presence is a balm, because your nervous system recognizes and validates theirs. You don't need many words. Your energy communicates a powerful truth. You are not alone. I know this place, and there is a way through it. This ability to feel with the other dissolves the shame and isolation that are the greatest components of trauma. creating a safe space for vulnerability and healing to emerge. However, every superpower has its kryptonite, and the curse of radical empathy is the dissolution of boundaries. Without a rigorous awareness and practice of energetic hygiene, the wounded healer can become a psychic landfill. Your natural porosity leads you to absorb the emotions, traumas, and even the physical symptoms of those around you, without distinguishing what is yours from what is theirs. This leads to a state of chronic exhaustion, emotional confusion, and what is known as compassion fatigue. You feel constantly drained, overwhelmed, and irritable, without understanding why. The curse deepens when the wounded healer begins to confuse absorbing others' pain with the act of healing. They believe that taking away the other's suffering is their responsibility, entering a savior dynamic that is ultimately harmful to both. It infantilizes the person being helped, robbing them of the opportunity to develop their own resilience, and it exhausts the healer, who is carrying a burden that is not theirs to bear. The essential work here is to transform reactive, unconscious empathy into conscious, bounded compassion. Compassion, unlike empathy, includes a certain wise distance. It is the ability to be present for the suffering of another with an open heart, but without merging with it. It is understanding that you can be a lighthouse in the storm, but you cannot pilot the other's boat. To cultivate this, practices of grounding and energetic cleansing are necessary. Protection visualizations, like enveloping yourself in a bubble of light, spending time in nature, breathing practices, and the constant question, "Is what I'm feeling mine?" are essential tools. Learning to say no, to set clear boundaries on your availability, and to recognize the early signs of empathic saturation is not an act of selfishness, but of sustainability. The true mastery of the wounded healer lies not in their capacity to feel the world's pain, but in their ability to do so without drowning in it, transforming their sensitivity from a curse that drains them into a superpower they can wield with wisdom, precision, and, above all, self-preservation. Our culture is obsessed with the idea of healing as a final destination, a state of arrival where pain is permanently eradicated and happiness is the norm. We search for the magic pill, the 5-step therapy, the weekend retreat that will fix us once and for all. But this is a dangerous illusion, a mirage that keeps us trapped in a cycle of frustration and inadequacy. For the wounded healer, the acceptance of a much deeper and more paradoxical truth is what finally sets them free. Healing is not a destination, it is an infinite process. True strength lies not in being healed, but in committing to the lifelong practice of healing oneself. This perspective changes everything. It relieves the crushing pressure of having to achieve a mythical state of perfection. Instead, life becomes a laboratory, a continuous journey of self-discovery and integration. The integrated wounded healer understands that their original wound, even after much work, will remain a part of their psychic structure. It is not a tumor to be removed, but a sensitive organ that requires constant care and attention. The scar may no longer hurt constantly, but it remains as a barometer, an early warning system that informs them when they are out of alignment, when they are betraying themselves, or when they are straying from their path. The wound becomes their greatest teacher, their most reliable internal compass. This commitment to infinite healing is what gives the wounded healer their authentic authority. They do not speak from a pedestal of someone who has arrived, but from the path, alongside those they guide. They can say with complete integrity, "I don't have all the answers. I still struggle. I still have dark days. But I know this path, and I know how to keep walking." This vulnerability does not diminish their power, it amplifies it exponentially. In a world full of gurus who feign invulnerability, the honesty of someone who admits their own humanity and their own ongoing process is radically healing. People do not connect with perfection, they connect with truth. The paradox is that by abandoning the goal of total healing, you become more effectively a healer. You cease to be a fixer and become a guardian of the process. Your role is no longer to lead people to a destination, but to teach them how to navigate their own journey, to develop their own tools, and to trust their own internal compass. You become a model not of a final outcome, but of a courageous and honest process. The practice of infinite healing also keeps you humble and open to learning. Every person you help becomes a mirror, reflecting back to you the parts of yourself that still need attention. The healer-patient relationship dissolves into a dance of mutual healing. By committing to your own continuous evolution, you ensure that your work remains alive, dynamic, and free from the stagnation of dogma or ego. The strength of the wounded healer is not in having won the war against their pain, but in having learned the art of negotiating a lasting and wise peace with it day after day. The wound, in itself, does not determine destiny. It is a bifurcation point, a crossroads on the soul's journey where a fundamental choice must be made. It is the choice between two archetypal identities that can arise from the same experience of pain, the victim and the guide. This is not a choice made once, but a conscious decision that needs to be renewed daily, sometimes moment by moment. The identity of the victim is seductive in its simplicity. It offers a coherent narrative for suffering. The pain is something that was done to me by external forces, other people, fate, the world. In this role, responsibility is external, and identity is defined by the injustice suffered. The victim lives in the past, revisiting the scene of the crime repeatedly, not to learn, but to reinforce their narrative of powerlessness. The psychic energy of the victim is passive, characterized by complaint, resentment, and a secret hope that an external savior will come to rescue them or to punish their aggressors. Although this role can generate sympathy and attention in the short term, in the long term it is a prison. By completely identifying with the wound, the victim surrenders their power and agency, becoming a ghost haunted by their own history. Their pain, instead of becoming a portal to wisdom, becomes a rigid identity and a justification for remaining stagnant. In contrast, the identity of the guide emerges when the individual makes a radical shift in perspective. The guide does not deny the reality of the pain or the injustice of what happened. They acknowledge and honor the wound, but refuse to allow it to be the totality of their identity. The fundamental question of the guide is not "why did this happen to me?" but rather, given that this happened, what do I choose to do with it now? This change of question is the alchemical turning point. It shifts the focus from the immutable past to the malleable present, from external blame to internal responsibility. The guide takes 100% responsibility for their own healing and for how they choose to show up in the world. They understand that while they did not choose their wound, they have total power to choose the meaning they assign to it. The psychic energy of the guide is active and creative. They study their wound as a scholar studies a text, searching for patterns, lessons, and hidden wisdom. They transform their story from an indictment into a testimony. The pain ceases to be proof of their weakness and becomes the credential of their strength. The transition from victim to guide is marked by acts of courage. It is the act of forgiving, not to absolve the other, but to free oneself from the poison of resentment. It is the act of setting firm boundaries, refusing to participate in dynamics that perpetuate their pain. It is the act of transforming a complaint into a clear request or constructive action. It is, ultimately, the decision to become the hero of one's own story, rather than a secondary character in the story of one's pain. Each day offers countless opportunities to make this choice. When faced with a trigger, you can regress into the victim narrative, or you can breathe and choose to respond from your center of power as a guide. It is this conscious, repeated choice that transforms a potential wounded healer into a force for transformation in the world. The final and most rewarding phase of the wounded healer's journey is the understanding that their healing was never just about themselves. The intensely personal and often solitary process of confronting one's own shadow and integrating the wound was, in fact, training for a greater service. It is the moment when the journey turns outward, not out of obligation, but as a natural consequence of inner wholeness. Suffering, when untransformed, contracts and isolates us. We live in a cocoon of pain, focused only on our own survival. But when pain is transmuted into wisdom, it expands. The energy that was once spent on repressing and managing pain is now liberated and seeks a creative outlet. This is the birth of collective purpose. The way this purpose manifests can vary infinitely. For some, it may be becoming a therapist, a coach, or a professional healer. For others, it may be through art, writing, painting, composing music that touches the universal wound. It could be becoming a compassionate teacher, an ethical business leader, a conscious parent who breaks cycles of family trauma. It could be simply becoming a friend whose presence is a sanctuary of authenticity and acceptance. The form is secondary to the essence. The essence is that you begin to use your gold, the wisdom extracted from your wound, as a gift to the world. The service does not come from a place of ego or the need to be a savior. The trap of the shadow healer. It comes from a place of resonance and responsibility. You feel responsible not for fixing the world, but for contributing your unique piece to the collective healing. Jung spoke of the collective unconscious, a shared reservoir of humanity's memories and archetypes. When an individual heals a personal manifestation of an archetypal trauma, the wound of abandonment, betrayal, insignificance, they are not just healing themselves. They are, in fact, contributing to the healing of that complex at the level of the collective unconscious. Their personal work sends ripples through the shared psychic field. By breaking a pattern of abuse in your own life, you weaken the strength of that pattern for all of humanity. By transforming hatred into compassion within yourself, you add that energy of compassion to the collective reservoir. The journey of the wounded healer, therefore, culminates in the recognition that there is no real separation between self and other, between personal healing and planetary healing. Your wound was the specific, personal entry point to universal suffering, and your healing becomes your unique contribution to the elevation of collective consciousness. Your legacy is not the absence of your wound, but the masterful use you made of it. You become living proof that rock bottom can be the solid foundation upon which a life of purpose and service is built. And by simply living your embodied truth, you illuminate the path for others to do the same, creating a legacy of healing that extends far beyond your own lifetime. We arrive at the final portal of the journey, where the focus shifts from action to being, from doing to legacy. The archetype that best symbolizes this final phase of the wounded healer's mastery is the phoenix. The phoenix is not just a symbol of rebirth, but of transformation through fire. It understands that the periodic annihilation of the old self is not a tragedy, but a necessity for renewal. The legacy of the wounded healer is not a marble statue, but the very essence of this transformative process. The first stage of the phoenix's legacy is the courage to burn. This means the willingness to voluntarily let go of identities, beliefs, and attachments that no longer serve your soul, even if it means going through a period of desolation and loss. The mature wounded healer no longer fears the fire of transformation, whether it be a midlife crisis, the loss of a relationship, or a career change. They have learned to trust the fire as their greatest agent of purification, and to surrender to the process of becoming ash. This is a legacy of non-attachment and trust in the psyche's cycle of death and rebirth. The second stage is the wisdom of inhabiting the ashes. After the burning, there is an intermediate period, a limbo. One is no longer the old self, but the new self has not yet emerged. This is a space of emptiness, of not knowing. Modern culture rushes us to exit this space as quickly as possible. The phoenix, however, knows that the ashes are fertile ground. It is in this state of stillness and receptivity that the seeds of the next phase of life are nurtured. To inhabit the ashes is a legacy of patience, of faith in the timing of the unconscious, and the ability to find peace in uncertainty. It is the refusal to fill the void with distractions, allowing what needs to emerge to do so in its own sacred time. The final stage is authentic rebirth. The new phoenix that emerges from the ashes is not an improved version of the old one. It is an entirely new creature, carrying the memory and wisdom of all the fires that preceded it. Its flight is different, its song is deeper. Likewise, the reborn wounded healer is not just a healed version of themselves. They are a new expression of the soul, more integrated, more compassionate, and freer. This rebirth is a legacy of hope. It demonstrates to the world that the end is never really the end, and that even from the most complete destruction, a more resilient and true beauty can be born. To leave a path of healing, and not of cinders, means that your legacy is not the story of your fire, but the inspiration of your post-fire flight. People will not remember the details of your suffering, but they will remember how you became more alive, more loving, and more authentic because of it. Your legacy is the permission your life grants to others to trust their own fire, to honor their own ashes, and to believe in their own inevitable rebirth. It is the passing of the torch, not of a doctrine, but of an embodied presence that whispers to the world, "Do not fear the fire. You are the fire.